how should Christians view this land?
Okay.
And real question is, why aren't we over there blowing people up
Right.
for our land back?
Right. So, in other words, why aren't we joining forces with the Jews?
Right.
And kind of going all crusade on them?
Because we branched a timeline too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Out of
Judaism. Yeah.
And so, just like the Muslims did, I guess.
Sure.
With our New Testament.
Right.
And so all those promises, I guess, are ours?
Yeah. Okay. So
let's go blow people up. and our guy did all of his coolest stuff there.
By our guy, you mean Jesus.
In Jerusalem, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. He did go to Jerusalem some. He wasn't there like all the time.
Well, that's where he got murdered.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. So all the best parts are there.
Are
in Jerusalem.
Was that the best part?
I mean, that's the part that matters, right?
I mean, yeah.
He rose from the dead there.
Right.
Right?
I mean, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's an important part.
Yeah.
It's an important part. No doubt.
Okay.
Yeah. He did spend a lot of time in Galilee.
So let's go.
Which is north of
Grab
Jerusalem.
your gun.
Okay. All right. So you first started off by asking, like, all right, how should Christians feel about the land issue, right? And who really has the land? Whose land is it?
This is why I don't understand, because the Christians think the Jews should have it.
Some do.
Some do, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that I know do.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah.
Okay.
So why don't we care to have it?
Okay.
Why do we care that they have it?
Oh, okay.
Instead of anybody else. Like, I guess you're saying that not all Christians believe that.
Correct.
So what is the scale? Is the scale the Muslims should have it to who cares?
Yeah, I think that's probably the scale.
Okay, and then somewhere in there is the Jews should have it.
Yeah,
in the mind of Christians.
Okay, in the mind of Christians, I think really this. Honestly, I don't think it's like going from Muslims should have it to. Well, I guess it does. Yeah. So because all right, before we get into the present land part, let me just back up a second.
Here we go.
Let me to give some perspective of.
Actually, we had it first. And you guys tried to blow us up first.
No. We're not getting into things blowing up right now. Okay. All right. So in Galatians chapter 3, all right, which we read some of that last week.
Okay.
But in Galatians chapter 3, there's an important verse in here. And so that Paul is writing to the Galatians, and Paul says in Galatians 3, verse 16, "Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed." He does not say, "and to seeds," as they're referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your seed, who is Christ." And so this is, to be honest with you, where so much of it, of the understanding of the land kind of comes into play.
Okay.
All right. So we talked about last week where you've got one group of Christians that kind of hold to what's called a replacement theology. The church has replaced Israel, or has replaced ethnic Israel as the true. They're the true spiritual Israel. Okay.
Right. I think that's where I fall.
Okay. All right.
After listening back to it 3 times.
All right. So you moved from the second one back to or to the first one. Okay. Yeah. All right. So here it says he does not say to the seeds, okay, as they're referring to many, but referring to one, and to your seed, who is Christ. In other words, that all the promises that were spoken to Abraham and to his seed are, so really that could be interpreted, replacement theology would say, the promises were spoken to Abraham and to Christ. In other words, that Christ became the fulfillment of all of the promises promised to Abraham in
See,
that
that
covenant.
makes sense
Okay?
to me.
All right.
Except for the other verse that you read about forever,
Yeah.
about the land
Yeah.
being
theirs
the Jewish
forever.
people's forever.
Right. And I think that is, so really, you're almost asking for one verse in the New Testament to undo all of the promises that were made about the land in the Old Testament.
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that?
Yep.
All right.
Because it goes along with everything else.
Okay.
Like, it seems like everything physical that the Jews had to do to please God got turned into spiritual.
Okay.
Like offerings and the curtain and having to go to a priest, a rabbi,
or the priest,
or
a
a priest to get prayers did. And
I don't know if I would say they converted to spiritual on those elements.
But
What I would say is that Christ, because he became the sacrifice,
right?
Sacrifices were no longer needed. It was not that they were not. It was not that all of the sacrifices became spiritual sacrifices. It was the fact that they were just simply weren't needed.
So would Jesus then become the land?
That is in replacement theologies. That's their position.
Because that makes sense along with everything else.
Okay,
that's where I have.
That's where
you've
come to. Yes. Yeah, and they would say no. He has become the land, right? Like so, and they would reference like another passage like Hebrews 4, where it talks about having a rest in God. Canaan was supposed to be a land of rest.
Okay.
And so now in Jesus, that land of rest is found in him. Okay.
That makes sense.
Right.
Wouldn't he be all the things?
Wouldn't he? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I get what you're saying, but I also think that there's another part, and that's, I'm going to keep reading.
Okay.
So verse 17, my point is this: the law, which came 430 years later. So this is the law that's been given to Moses, the law that we find in Exodus and Leviticus. Okay. That the law that comes 430 years later, so the law that comes 430 years later after this Abrahamic covenant.
And Abraham's long dead.
Long dead. Okay. 430 years dead. Okay.
Right, but they all used to live to like billions of years back then.
Well, you and your billions. Okay. Not quite billions. And their years were starting to, decrease. But yeah, I get your point. They did live longer. But he says, the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously established by God and thus cancel the promise. For if the inheritance is based on the law, it is no longer based on the promise, but God has graciously given it to Abraham through the promise. So Paul is saying, listen, we understand the law, is no longer in force, no longer in play.
Oh, so you're reading from the New Testament?
I'm reading from the New Testament here.
Okay.
Paul's saying that the law given to Moses, that law is, we get it, that law's no longer in play. Because that law said to the inheritors of the land, if you do right, if you obey, you'll get the land.
Right.
If you disobey, you're out of the land. Okay? So there's this constant idea of blessing and curses, found in the law. And in the laws, kind of upping in the law with the covenant that we find in Deuteronomy. But the point being here is that he's saying, but the Abrahamic covenant, that covenant was based on a promise, not based on law, not based on keeping things, doing things right or wrong. It was based on a promise. And so, that promise is going to endure until its completion. And I don't know if we can say that promise has been fulfilled. Because even when the Israelites left Egypt with Moses, I get it. They wandered around the wilderness for 40 years, but then they began to move into Canaan. Even at that point, they still did not go to the boundaries that were established by God in Genesis 15.
Seems like they would have gotten there after 40 years.
Well, remember in 40 years...
Were they going back and forth and just doing circles?
Yeah, they were... Yes. Like if you look...
Moses, we've
if you look at the geographical location in which they wandered around the wilderness in Sinai, if you look at the 40 years in which they just wandered around that geographical location, it's hilarious. I mean, because they were literally just wandering, in this really small location, just making circles, zigzagging. I mean, it was wild. But anyway, but then, they eventually move from that, the wandering, the wilderness, they move from that into entering the land of Canaan under Joshua.
Right.
And the Lord...
Moses wasn't allowed in.
Moses wasn't allowed in.
Right.
Moses dead. And so Joshua leads the people in. They begin to take some of the lands. The 12 tribes begin to establish their boundaries and that. So
they started it.
Who started what?
The Jews started it.
Started what?
Right then, with Joshua. Started all the fighting.
Oh, started all the fighting for the land of Canaan?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But remember, they had been in Canaan before. Okay, so I guess full history. Abraham and his family went to the land of Canaan.
Okay.
Settled down in Canaan, established themselves in Canaan.
Okay.
He had Isaac, then there was Jacob.
And there was nobody there that they had to kill to get it.
Right.
Okay.
Went to the land. Went Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob had a son named Joseph.
Right.
And
he left and went to Egypt.
Egypt, yeah.
Right.
The other brothers did some jacked up stuff to him, but he ended up in Egypt, right hand of Pharaoh, and
he was gay.
No.
Oh. He wore that rainbow thing or whatever. So
you're talking about the coat in many colors.
Yes.
Yeah. That's nothing to do with his sexuality.
Okay. All right. Never mind.
I won't even go there. Good Lord. All right. So Joseph. So there's all of Abraham's family is in Canaan. Okay. Right. They end up coming to Egypt because there's a famine in the land. So Joseph allows all of his family to come from Canaan to Egypt.
Right.
And
for food. Okay.
They end up living there. They're given the land that was called Goshen, which is an area there in Egypt. And that's their land at that point so that they could have food. And then after 400 years of living there, God ends up delivering them out because they came there voluntarily. But after a while, there was a Pharaoh that didn't remember Joseph, had no connection to Joseph.
Right.
And he ended up enslaving the Hebrew people.
Again?
What do you mean again?
After Moses got them all out of there?
No, before. I'm sorry.
Oh, Joseph was before.
Yeah, Joseph was before.
Oh.
So, all right. Make sure I'm tracking. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph.
And then Moses.
There's 400 years
of slavery
in Egypt. Moses comes and delivers them out.
So it was Joseph's fault.
Yeah. Well, Joseph.
Gay.
Joseph. No. No. All right.
Okay.
It wasn't his fault and he was not gay. All right. Good God. All right. Good God, man. But I don't even know where I'm going in all this anymore. All right. Here's my point. They were there in Canaan. Okay. So that was, in other words, Moses was taking the Israelites back home. Problem is, it had been 400 years.
Right. And there were people there to kill now.
And now there's Canaanites. Now there's, there's the Philistines are near, right. It's the Amalekites are there. Like, it's just crazy.
So which parts of this Bible story which parts of Genesis and Exodus do the Muslims believe is true?
Okay.
Because if they don't believe that, if they believe everything else except the one verse,
right,
where it says,
well, but remember, okay, so Jerusalem is important to the Muslims. They think they have a right and a claim to it, but for the Muslims, they're not looking at just that land.
Okay.
So for the Muslims, they believe that obviously that their religion should spread worldwide.
Right.
So they're not as localized to a specific land. I mean, Jerusalem's important, but it's not as important as, like, for example, Mecca. Okay.
Okay.
So it's not as important as areas that are in Saudi Arabia.
So why do they want it so bad? Or do they just want to kill Jews?
I feel like there's an element of truth in both. Like, they want it because they believe they have a right to it, but then and then even historically they might even make a claim of, well, we were there longer. Like, we were actually there for 1,000 years.
Right.
So shouldn't we have it? If anyone's going to have it, shouldn't we have it? Right. And then there's also the issue of the way the land was given back to the Jews in the 1940s.
Okay.
And expanded further in the 1960s. So I believe that that's part of the issue as well. Okay. Because they feel like their people were displaced because of that.